Hello, my name is Lydia Mortazali, and I'm a second-year undergraduate studying history at the University of Exeter. When selecting an object for this talk, I wanted to choose something obscure, something that most people would be unlikely to know much about. Hence, I chose the man trap. Those not familiar with man traps may think that this is a contraption to capture wild animals, but it is in fact an example of the man traps used to catch poachers up until 1827, when they were made illegal. This particular example is from 1750 to 1820 and was used on Dartmoor to protect land from poaching. In today's world, it seems shocking that something so violent and inhumane would be allowed for popular use to protect land and property as recently as the 19th century. The man trap initially caught my eye for this reason. In the case, it is juxtaposed between examples of nobility dress of Georgian England. The comparisons that can be drawn between the lavish images of extravagance and gentility that we remember today with the man trap, which is certainly less sumptuous and far more barbaric, is a striking one. Although they are not as incongruous as you might imagine, as the material wealth demonstrated gave people something worth protecting. Culturally, we tend to pick and choose which aspects of the past we want to remember and include in our national history. It is uncomfortable for us to consider that our ancestors preyed on their fellow men as if they were wild beasts. Even animals nowadays are caught more humanely than the man trap would suggest. I am interested in the public memory of historical periods and events and how they contrast to the past reality. Through this talk, I will address this contrast and the motives behind using man traps. Firstly, it is interesting to note how a contraption like this worked and the damage that would be caused. The trap would be anchored to the floor to prevent a poacher from being able to move it once caught. It would be spring-loaded with the teeth pulled apart and held there, and leaving the foot blades at an angle in the centre of the teeth. Once stepped on, the teeth would snap shut. This would break the occupant's leg, and on a trap with teeth like this, it is likely that the bone would be penetrated. It is hard to imagine how a person could survive a cold winter's night on Dartmoor with their leg encased in a man trap. Equally difficult to imagine that every trap was removed immediately the law was passed in 1827. Perhaps we should all tread carefully next time we head to Dartmoor for a Sunday afternoon walk. Clearly designed to cause suffering and not merely capture their victims, it is interesting to look at the motives behind their use, and indeed, what made their use acceptable within society. We've all had the expression, an Englishman's home is his castle, and this was never seen as more true than in the Georgian period, despite the law stating the fact originating in 1628. I was inspired to follow this line of inquiry after watching the television programme At Home with the Georgians, researched and presented by Amanda Vickery. Georgian households went to great lengths to protect their homes from intruders, with numerous locks and bolts, shutters, and in some cases, servants even slept by the front door to allow them to alert the family if a burglar was trying to force their way in. Georgians feared the night, and punishments were incredibly severe for those that broke past the frontier to another man's home. Consequently, man traps were used in gardens to protect the house from burglary or to capture them if they made to escape. Thomas Paine doesn't publish The Rights of Man until 1791, but within the first year there were said to be 50,000 copies in circulation in Britain, which perhaps explains why attitudes changed. Part of looking at historical objects is to understand them in the context of their own time, and try not to pass modern judgment on them. The time period in which this man trap is believed to have been in use coincides with a boom in literacy, which could indicate why people became increasingly averse to their use, with more people having access to philosophical works outlining the beginnings of human rights. We can see from newspaper evidence that man traps were indeed perceived as everyday items that any man of wealth may possess. In February 1801, in the advertisements and notices, a man trap is listed alongside blankets and a quantity of books as part of deceased Simon Oughtred's inventory that were being auctioned. From other notices at the time, it appeared that this was part of a wider pattern and that man traps were highly sellable items. Later, man traps were kept to be used as spectacles of interest and awe, suggesting how quickly they moved between the everyday to the horrific, and yet their use in Nina Borden's children's story, The Peppermint Pig, written in 1975 but set at the turn of the century, suggests that man traps of varying kinds were still in the public consciousness and recognises what they were, as opposed to the reception they receive today. The protagonist Poll demonstrates this as when she is walking through the wood scared of poachers. She thought, man traps. There was an old man trap hanging outside Nero's junk shop in Station Street, a hideous contraption with cruel teeth and a notice above it, Nero's Little Nipper. Aunt Harriet said it was just an old curiosity and man traps were illegal now. How could she be sure that there wasn't one left in this wood, abandoned and rusty, but savagely dangerous still? This highlights that public memory persisted when the reality had phased out and quickly became a torture construction belonging to a bygone age. To conclude, I would argue that man traps offer an interesting and alternative insight into the attitudes of a society which today is remembered for high society and its problem with gin. Today we see man traps such as this as barbaric and inhumane, but although the methods for protecting our property now are different, so is the technology available to us. CCTV cameras are everywhere. Electric fences border our fields, and alarms protect everything from your house to your car. Man traps in Britain may be a thing of the past, but we're still just as on guard to protect our castles. Thank you for listening.